All right, perfect. With that, we're going to go ahead and call the meeting to order. It's 7:01 p.m. Deb, would you please call roll?
Councillor Buck is running late, but is expected to be here. Councillor Lenhart.
Here.
For the record, Councillor Lenhart is appearing virtually. Councillor Harvey.
Here.
Councillor Cry is excused absent. Councillor O'Brien.
Hey, Heather, you may have to dial *9 to unmute yourself.
Calling the roll call, Councillor O'Brien.
Sorry, maybe *6.
For the record, Councillor O'Brien is
I'm
present
here.
virtually and is present and accounted for. Councillor Bremen.
Here. All right, with that, if you'd please stand with me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, we have an agenda before us. Are there any changes to that agenda?
No changes to the agenda, Mr. Mayor.
All right, do I have a motion to adopt?
So moved. Second.
Councillor Lenhart.
Yes.
Councillor Harvey.
Yes.
Councillor O'Brien.
Yes.
Councillor Bremen.
Yes.
Motion passes 4-0.
All right, we do not have any proclamations or presentations tonight, so we're going to move into public participation. So this section is set aside for the City Council to listen to comments by the public regarding items that do not otherwise appear on the agenda. Generally, the City Council will not discuss the issue and will not take an official action on that. We please ask anybody in the audience that would like to speak to limit it to 3 minutes. So is there anybody in the audience that would like to speak on something not on the agenda? All right, if you'd step up to the mic and state your name and address for the record.
All right, my name is Matt Barber. I live at 334 Crystal Court here in town. I'm a pastor at Bethlehem Ministries, church, Hebrew Roots Christian Church here in Fruita, actually across the highway. And want to thank each of you, first off, for the service that you, men and women, do for our community. It's greatly appreciated. It does not go unnoticed. Your time and effort and energies, we are just so thankful for. I've studied enough world history. I'm a liberal arts major, so take that for what it's worth. A whole myriad of different things, but I do have a minor in history. I've studied enough world history to know that governments can be established on and function through any number of different motivations and ideologies. And I've noticed enough of our own country's history and government to know that religion, faith, and in particular the Christian faith and its principles was designed to be the cornerstone of our nation. Even though government and its functions affect a myriad of different aspects of life, spiritual and civil, I believe a spiritual focus should be the foundation of everything it does. It's come to my attention recently that the City Council no longer opens up their meetings and prayers it once did. And because I and so many others believe so strongly that our city and its leaders should be guided by God's leading, I'd like to commit this council and its efforts to God right now through prayer. So Father God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, I thank you for the men and women on this city council who have stepped up to serve this community. Whether they believe in you or not, I'm thankful that you have raised them up and ordained them to lead this city in these days. You have great plans for our nation and our local community, and you have allowed these people to be a part of putting those plans into effect. I ask that they would be guided by your principles that are never changing and have always proven themselves to be effective and powerful. I ask that they wouldn't be guided or swayed by popular opinion or the emotions of those around them that may come into conflict with your character and the principles and ethics that you embody. Whether these leaders seek out your will and your ways directly, indirectly, or even unknowingly, I pray that your love and care for the people that they serve would be manifested in the decisions that they make for our community. I pray that because of the decisions these men and women make, our city would be a light and encouragement to other cities, states, and even our nation as a whole. I pray that people would recognize that the city of Fruita is founded and run on biblical principles and that it is blessed and prosperous because of it. And through everything that happens in our community, whether good or bad, I pray that you would be glorified. And I thank you that your grand plans will ultimately be accomplished no matter what. Please grant these men and women strength, wisdom, humility, and courage in leading our city to the best of their ability and with a focus on you and your kingdom. In Yeshua HaMashiach, in Jesus Christ's name, amen. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Is there anybody else in the audience that'd like to speak? Please state your name and address for the record, please.
Archie Lopez, 1681 Ruby Lee Drive. And I'm like Matt. I just think that biblical values need to be heard and followed. So, excuse me. But I just wanted to offer up prayer as well for the meeting, and thank all of you guys for your service. So, Lord, we give this meeting to you, and we thank you for these guys who are just willing to take their time and serve the community. We thank you for that. But we do lift up right ruling to you, Lord, and we pray your hand over these meetings and your wisdom. In Yeshua's great name, amen.
Thank you, Archie. Is there anybody else in the audience that would like to speak? Please state your name and address for the record, please.
Okay. My name is Wendy Wood. My gosh, what's our address? 1891 J and 610 Road, Fruita. I'm also a pastor at Beit Lechem with Pastor Matt here. And I actually just came from praying with some of our county leaders, and it was a really awesome time. So that's my heart too, is just to continue to lift you up, to support you, to pray for you, and also to pray here for God's agenda. So Father, I just thank you. I thank you for this time, and I do thank you. We lift you up. We thank you for this beautiful city of Fruita. I thank you that you are breaking down dividing walls, and you are teaching people how to love across just across belief systems, across the left and the right aisles, that you would help us to be a bridge, that you would show us what it means to love people and to care based on their character and not by their skin color or their preferences, but just because they're a human on this earth. I thank you that for this great nation that allows us these freedoms to speak. And I thank you for this great city that lifts up your name. I declare that Fruita is yours, that this nation is yours because you gave it to us many years ago. And I thank you for these unalienable rights that cannot be taken by any human. So Father, we just thank you and we declare that Fruita is yours. And I pray for, again, righteous right ruling in this city. Amen. Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy. Is there anybody else in the audience who'd like to speak?
Jerry Wood, 1891 J and 6/10. And to echo what has already been said to some degree, we are a nation and a city and a state founded on godly principles. And I do think it's a shame to put that aside and to just set opening the meetings with prayer aside. We even say a pledge of allegiance to the flag and acknowledge that we are one nation under God. And if we don't bring God into this meeting, we can't really expect him to bless what we're going to do, what we're going to decide. So I would like to pray, but I would also like to state that I don't think it's a coincidence, really, that in a very short period of time, it seems like we've set aside prayer to open the meetings, and we've also seems to embraced this agenda that is racially dividing, critical race theory, dressed up with a little bit of lipstick calling Fruita for equality, but it is really a racially dividing and racist program. So I think that there's no coincidence in that. So with that, I'll close in prayer. My speech in prayer. God, I thank you for this time together. I thank you for having open meetings so that we can discuss things and say things openly. And I just thank you for the city council. And I just ask that you guide their hearts and their minds to make good decisions and to lead this community well. We thank you. Amen.
Thank you, Jerry. Is there anyone else in the audience who'd like to speak on something not on the agenda? All right. Oh, come on up, state your name and address for the record, please.
Good evening. I'm Mark Young, 2942 Erica Road in Grand Junction, Colorado. I'm a Mason County resident. Just want to say thank you for this opportunity to speak. You know, prayer is very important in this nation, for we are one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Let us pray. Dear Heavenly Father, Lord God Almighty, Almighty Yahweh, we thank you for this opportunity. We thank you for all of your blessings from above. We thank you for your daily provisions, both here in the Grand Valley and beyond. We thank you for the water. Thank you for the clean sky and the wonderful people in Mesa County and the city of Fruita. God, I pray that you will guide, direct, bless, and protect our families, our friends, our neighbors, our community, our cities, our county, our state, and the nation. For these things we say and ask in the precious and holy name of Jesus Christ, Almighty Yeshua. Amen. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Is there anybody else in the audience that'd like to speak on something not on the agenda? All right, hearing none, we're going to close the public participation and move into our consent agenda. So all of these items are all conditions or requirements have been agreed to or met prior to the time they come before council for final action. These items will all be approved by a single motion of the city council. So with that, we're going to open up the consent agenda to public comment. Is there anybody that'd like to speak on anything on the consent agenda? All right, hearing none, I'll bring it back to council. Is there any discussion or a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
That was
Oh,
Heather.
wait,
Heather
was
said
there a
second.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear it. Counselor O'Brien,
Yes.
Counselor Bremen? Yes. Counselor Harvey,
Yes.
Counselor Lenhart.
Yes.
Motion passes 4-0.
All right, with that, we're going to move into our public hearings. We've got 2 quasi-judicial hearings tonight. So with the quasi-judicial, we'll have a staff presentation on these items, and then we will open up the public comment. And so our first item is ordinance 2021-14. The second reading, request to approve an ordinance annexing approximately 15.17 acres of property located at 1123 19 Road into the city of Fruita. The patron annexation, and we've got our city planner, Henry Hempel, here to present on that.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council. As you said, my name is Henry. I am the city planner here, and I'll be giving the staff presentation on ordinance 2021-14, the Patron annexation. Land development application 2021-12. It's an annexation application. The property owner is Fiddler's Grove LLC. The representative is Vortex Engineering. The location of the annexation is 1123 19 Road. It's currently zoned in the county as AFT or agricultural, forestry, and transitional. And this is a request for approval of an annexation of approximately 15.17 acres into the Fruita city limits. Touch base on legal notice. It's set forth both in our land use code and state statutes, so there's quite a bit to keep a track of. The standard legal notice that we have is postcards, sign posting, and a legal ad in a paper. Those were all accomplished on April 23rd, which is 18 days prior to the Planning Commission meeting, meeting the minimum 15-day requirement. The City Council adopted a resolution to basically set a hearing date to determine whether the property was eligible for annexation. That was resolution 2021-10. After that, initiates a 4 consecutive week legal notice in a local newspaper, which occurred on April 23rd, April 30th, May 7th, and May 14th, accomplishing that in accordance with state statute. Here's a picture on the right-hand side of an aerial photograph of the subject property. You can see here it's at the northwest corner of K Road and 19 Road. The city of Fruita recently annexed a piece of property known as the Skull annexation earlier this year, and it is here on the west side, zoned community residential, and has the 1/6 contiguity, but also shows the existing zoning districts. And then the Brandon Estates subdivision is zoned PUD with Holly Park and the location of the new Monument Ridge Elementary School just to the northwest as well. The comprehensive plan contains a map called our future land use map that calls out the urban growth boundary, how and where we're planning on growing in the future, with some designated zoning classifications as guiding principles to make decisions that get us here tonight. And here you can see a snip of that future land use map and a zoomed in clip of the subject property to give you an idea. Here on the right-hand side, this dashed line is our urban growth boundary along the west side of 19 Road. Back in 2008 and recently in 2020, this line remained the same. And so it's been in our comprehensive plan for a number of years. And now that the city of Fruita has essentially extended its boundaries just a bit with annexing parcels as they come, there is consistency with that urban growth boundary and the zoning. To jump ahead to approval criteria, there's 9 that are set forth in section 17.06.040A1 of the land use code. The annexation may be approved only after considering the following criteria. Not going to go through these in immense detail. That information was included in the staff report. But to just touch on each one of those, the subject property is contiguous with existing city limits and meets the 1/6 contiguity requirement. The subject property is or can be efficiently served by city utilities, including water, sewer, parks, drainage systems, and streets as development moves towards that direction. The subject property can be efficiently served by police and other municipal services. It is within the boundary of our police service, and so that wouldn't be extended nearly at all. We are already serving this area. The other one would be trash collection, which the city of Fruita does provide for residential development, and so providing that should not increase that capacity much at all. The subject property is consistent with the community goals, principles, and policies expressed in the master plan. Again, further details expressed in the staff report, and I'd be glad to answer any questions following this presentation. It is supported by local residents and landowners. This is important because this annexation petition must be signed by all the landowners of the subject property required or proposed to be annexed. So if 4 people own the same property, they all have to sign the annexation petition consenting to that annexation. In this case, one group, a company, Fiddler's Grove LLC, owned by just one person, as a statement of authority as recorded with Mesa County Clerk, was signed by that property owner, and so that's supported there as well. I believe 44 landowners were noticed, and we have not received any written public comments. However, we did receive some verbal comments at the Planning Commission meeting on May 11th with just some concerns and questions about development and what that's going to look like down the road. Unfortunately, with this annexation, we can't answer a lot of those questions, and so I'm sure that those will come up at some point when the property is developed. Water and ditch rights can be provided in accordance with city policies. At this point, the annexation of the subject property only serves as incorporation into the city limits with no modifications to utilities such as sanitary water and irrigation water. The applicant and the property owner are aware that city policy is 1 to 1.5 irrigation shares per irrigated acre. At the point of development, when that does happen, the understanding is passed along to the developer is pretty consistent within our code and has not changed in quite some time as a requirement. So those standards are very unique. It has a logical, social, and economic association with the city once developed. As we kind of annex properties and zone them accordingly, the development will have to be reviewed under its own merits. And at that point, the comprehensive plan does support residential development, thus providing a logical, social, and economic association with the city limits, because we do have land use control over that if and when the property is annexed and zoned. So that's something that the city should take into consideration. It can meet the existing infrastructure standards set forth by the city, and staff recommends approval of the annexation petition with the condition that Otley Avenue to have a total of 35 feet from the section line, 19 Road to have a total of 50 feet from the section line, and a dedication of a 14-foot multi-purpose easement adjacent to all right-of-way adjoining the subject property. And so moving along from the Planning Commission meeting, they recommended approval at their May 11th, 2021 meeting by a vote of 6-0. Like I mentioned before, no written public comments have been received to date. However, there were some public comments made at the Planning Commission meeting. Those minutes are again provided in the packet that you guys had to review. No reviewer expressed any concerns with this annexation. And to conclude the presentation, staff recommends approval of the annexation petition with the condition that there will be dedication of additional right-of-way on the Otley Avenue and 19 Road frontages and a 14-foot multi-purpose easement adjacent to the right-of-way. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. And then the applicant. Did-
Share this. You want me to share this? Yeah. Okay.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and Commissioners. My name is Ty Johnson. I'm a senior planner with Vortex Engineering. Our address is 861 Root Avenue in Grand Junction, and I'm the owner's representative for the request before you this evening. I'm going to cover the annexation and also the zoning. So Henry will get to the zoning in a second, but. So the location of the subject property is 1123 19 Road. And it's approximately 15 acres in size. And again, the application before you this evening is for an annexation and a zoning, initial zoning of the property. The subject property is classified as R4 through 8, future land use designation in the comprehensive plan. And the applicant is requesting a rezone to CR, community residential, to implement that future land use designation in the comprehensive plan. Up on the screen here, you can see the subject parcel outlined in sort of a green teal. To the left is the Scala annexation, which Henry alluded to. You all might remember that. It's recently been annexed and zoned as community residential. The map up here is just, it's not updated, but that is zoned community residential. And that is what is requested. The subject property is within the urban growth boundary. And again, we're requesting annexation for that property. The request to annex and rezone meets the criteria of the Fruita Land Use Code as Henry has laid out in his first presentation and in the staff report. All review agency comments have been addressed or will be addressed through the subdivision process at the time of development. And after demonstrating how the request to annex and zone the property at 1123 19 Road meets the goals and policies of the comprehensive plan and the applicable sections of the Fruita Land Use Code, the applicant respectfully requests approval. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, we're going to open up the public comment. I don't know if anybody's online, are there? So with this, we're going to open up this to public comment. If there's anybody online that would like to comment on this, Shannon will give you the information. I think it's what, *6 now? Or is it *9? *9 if you're calling in, or you can raise your hand in the bottom menu. So if you want to leave comments, we'll give you 3 minutes for comments. So is there anybody online that would like to leave a comment on this item?
Seeing none, Mr. Mayor.
All right. And since there's nobody else in our audience, we're going to close public comment and bring it back to council. Does anybody have any questions on this item?
No. I just have a kind of a, I don't know, it's not really, maybe it's a question. It's kind of a question, kind of a comment. I know that there's been a lot of chatter about the traffic at that intersection there, 19 and K. Once it's annexed into the city, do we have a plan to sort of address that in the interim? Because I imagine some of these changes that we're talking about long-term will take a while to implement. Do we have a plan for making that intersection safer in the meantime?
Yeah, so The annexation portion of that, it would be incorporating into the city limits. And then at the time of development, which it kind of sounds like that's going to be happening here pretty soon, the hope would be to make those intersection changes and make it a bit safer for those pedestrians. It's going to be kind of like an urban and rural intersection for a little bit, would be my assumption, until we get some of the other changes. But that comment was brought up in the Planning Commission meeting as well. And so I could see that happening, where some offsite improvements allow it to make it a little bit easier for folks to navigate that intersection, maybe a four-way stop or something.
Right. I guess my worry would just be that if the development doesn't happen right away, I mean, I know the plan is the plan, but there's just been a lot of worry in the community beyond this annexation. So I would hate for us to annex it and let it sit there for a long time and have another handful of accidents, anything that would be, I mean, there's already been some bad ones, so.
And Councilmember Harvey, like one of the tricky parts about this is that, you know, we do need a development to require a traffic study, and we need units proposed to justify improvements as a result of the development. And so it's difficult to project what that would be. Certainly we can use like the underlying density allotment to somewhat project out, but we have no idea where those access locations will likely be that could disperse the traffic. The reality is that it's our anticipation and somewhat expectation that we will be furnished with a subdivision application at some point in time here in the not so distant future, which was talked about with regards to Rose Creek, which is just to the west of there. You know, the applicant fully expects that we'll require a traffic study as a part of that application. I think we'll be able to know exactly what those safety related improvements are going to be, and then also any of the on-site improvements that are going to be required as a part of that.
Thanks.
All right, are there any other comments from council? Karen, Heather, do you guys have any comments or questions?
I do not.
No.
All right. Matthew said no. Lori? No. All right, then do we have a motion?
I move that we approve ordinance 2021-14 annexing approximately 15.17 acres of property located at 112319 Road into the city of Fruita.
I second.
Counselor Bremen?
Yes.
Counselor Buck? Yes. Counselor Harvey?
Yes.
Counselor O'Brien?
Yes.
Counselor Lenhart?
Yes.
Motion passes 5-0.
All right, we're going to move into our second public hearing, which is ordinance 2021-15, a second reading. Request to approve an ordinance amending the official zoning map of the city of Fruita by zoning approximately 15.17 acres of property located at 112319 Road to a community residential zone. And we're going to have Henry presenting on this one as well.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Members of council, my name is Henry. Be giving the staff presentation on this ordinance reading 2021-15. This is land development application 2021-13. It's the Patron rezone or a zoning request located at 112319 Road. It's currently zoned AFT, which is a county zoning designation, and it's a request for approval to zone approximately 15.17 acres to community residential. Touch base on legal notice. This is set forth in our land use code by section 17.01.130. Legal notice is required at least 15 days prior to the planning commission meeting, setting forth the hearing dates for both the planning commission and the city council. Those were all accomplished on April 22nd, which was the postcards, April 21st, which was the sign posting here you can see in the picture, and April 22nd for the legal ad in the paper, meeting the minimum 20 or 15-day requirement. Here you see an aerial photograph of the subject property on the right and a zoning map, a current zoning map of the Fruita city limits here. In the green is a PUD zoning district, and in the yellow here is a community residential zone district. The next slide shows the future land use map that's in our comprehensive plan. It shows the yellow, the kind of darker shade of yellow as residential 4 to 8 dwelling units, or 4 to 8, yeah, dwelling units per acre. But our land use code calls that out as community residential. And here you can see the dashed line as a zoomed in photo of that map is our urban growth boundary, and the subject property is just inside of that to the west. So the future land use map does support this zoning designation and did support the recent adoption of the ordinance to annex the subject property. And I should mention that the zoning must come after the annexation in order to make sure that you have the land use ability to make the decision on the zoning before you actually annex it. So there's a process as why you see these after the annexation. The review criteria is set forth in section 17.13.060 for a rezone of the official zoning map. It's required to meet only 2 of the criteria. As you can see here, the underlined words and or those statements. This application, all zoning petitions must meet number 1 and one of the following 4 after that. So it does meet the compatibility of the surrounding land uses, as you've seen before, as the current zoning map does support community residential to the west, which was recently adopted by council earlier this year for community residential, and is supported by the comprehensive plan and can be consistent with the city's goals, policies, and that master plan, which I mentioned before. And then moving on to number 5, the zoning amendment is incidental to the annexation, and the proposed zoning is consistent with the city's goals and policies, and master plan. So those kind of say the same thing, but when you have an annexation, you don't necessarily have an amendment to a zoning map that's already established because this subject property isn't currently in the city limits, so that wouldn't be applicable. Nor would a comprehensive revision of our city's master plan affect this subject property without the annexation and the zoning petition. So that's why it meets number 1 and number 5, and is supported in our comprehensive plan to be included in the city limits. We've had it planned for a number of years to both be community residential and has been in our urban growth boundary with our previous master plan, which is back in like 2008 timeframe, and is included with the 2020 master plan that was recently adopted. So with that, I'll conclude the presentation. There's no written public comments received to date. No reviewer expressed any concerns with this application. The Planning Commission recommended approval by a vote of 6-0 at their May 11th public meeting, and staff recommends approval of the rezone application with no conditions. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
All right. With that, we're going to open it up to public comment. So is there anybody in the audience that would like to speak on this item? Looking at who's in our audience. We're not hearing any, right, Shannon?
Seeing none, Mr. Mayor.
All right, with that, we're going to close public comment and bring it back to council. Does anybody have any questions or comments on this item? Hearing none, do we have a motion?
I move that we approve ordinance 2021-15, amending the official zoning map of the city of Fruita by zoning approximately 15.17 acres of property located at 1123 19 Road to a community residential zone.
Second.
Counselor Buck? Yes. Counselor O'Brien?
Yes.
Counselor Bremen? Yes. Counselor Lenhart?
Yes.
Counselor Harvey?
Yes.
Motion passes 5-0.
All right, thank you, Henry.
Thank you.
With that, we're going to move into our administrative agenda. Our one item tonight is discussion of upcoming land use code updates. And so we've got our Planning and Development Director, Dan Karras, here.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council. We've got Jessica Garro on the line this evening that's going to walk us through a presentation of a lot of the work that we've done to align our code with our comprehensive plan, and then also with a lot of the or a lot of the previous changes that have been made to our land use code earlier in this year. And so some of this can be, looked at as somewhat procedural cleanup, but there are some, some purposeful questions that we want to bounce off of the council before we send this out for review to all of our review agency partners, and kind of send this through the more official, amendment to our land development code, land use code, through the ordinance process. So Jessica's going to walk us through that. And I think there are some key points in that discussion where we'd like to stop and get some feedback just to make sure that, everybody that went through the comp plan process, went through the previous zoning related changes, are on board with the direction that we're headed. So, again, just want to say kudos to Jessica. She's done a tremendous job at Design Workshop and working with Fruita, and certainly through the unique challenges that COVID presented us, I feel like we still were able to accomplish a lot and keep everybody very well informed. So hopefully you see these changes aligning with the direction that we're headed. And certainly if you've got any questions, the planning team, including Jessica and our manager, and are able to certainly assist you with those. And all these changes have been reviewed by our legal team as well. So, Paul and Mary Elizabeth have looked through these. So with that, Jessica, floor is yours.
Great. Thanks, Dan. And thanks again for letting me join your meeting. I apologize, I'm here virtually tonight, but I'll be there in person for the next meeting. So excited to review with you some of the work that we've done over the past few months. So we are, as a reminder, updating the land use code to reflect the 2020 comprehensive plan. And previously, the city adopted changes to zoning, density bonus, design guidelines, and the parking chapters, really some meaty sections of the land use code. Tonight, the amendments that we are focusing on are more process related, and they're really focused on creating clarity in language, standardizing your processes, making sure that the code is something that anyone can pick up and understand. So as a reminder, this has been our overall process, and right now we're in this kind of production adoption timeline. To guide our work, we focused on creating an outline for the new code. And as I said, the sections you're reviewing today are really a lot about process. And we're excited to get your feedback. We had a touch base with the Planning Commission in late June and got some feedback from them, and are interested, as Dan said, in council's feedback so that we can make sure that these amendments that are proposed are really tailored to Fruita, right-sized for you, and ready for kind of more public engagement. So I'm going to go ahead and dive in and go through all of the sections here on your screen. We're going to pause after each section to see what comments or questions council has. Right. So one of the first proposed changes is to the powers and duties, which is actually located in Title II. The changes that we're proposing are not really substantial in terms of the requirements or powers for city staff or city boards and commission. Instead, it really focuses on ensuring there's alignment with state law, clarifying the different roles for each board, and addressing the appointment process. While it's generally consistent for Board of Adjustment, Planning Commission, and Historic Preservation Board, the language was just a little bit different. So we really tried to align that so there's real clarity for everyone. And what does that appointment process look like? And what is the role for each of those boards? Additionally, right now, the Historic Preservation Board is actually located in the Land Use Code in Title 17. So we're pulling it out of there and adding it into Title II so that everything, again, is just really clear. There's one place to look to understand what the powers and duties for all of the boards are. So that's the high-level summary of changes to this section. I'll pause here and see, Dan, if you've got anything to add, and then council, if you have any comments or questions.
Anybody have any questions? Nope. Nope.
Okay, great. We'll keep going. Right, the next section that we wanted to review with you is what we're calling common development review procedures. which is really the review process for all land use applications. This is going to be a brand new section that is added to the code, and it's really a best practice. Again, creating a one-stop shop for any user of the code to go and understand what is my review process, what are the steps that I need to go through, and which boards or is reviewing this, and which might be administrative. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time on this chart. This is one of one set that's in this new code section. It outlines when a pre-application conference is required. You can see that in that first column. It's either mandatory or optional, and that's just a conference that happens with city staff. They outline what's required for the review process. The second column is the neighborhood meeting. We're introducing this as a new portion of the review process. And we're creating very specific guidelines and requirements for what a neighborhood meeting looks like. And so we've outlined you can do this as an in-person meeting at, say, town hall, at the library, at the rec center, someplace that's publicly accessible. You might do an online meeting. You could choose to do some small group meetings with immediate neighbors, if that made sense. You might have a website. You might have an enhanced public notice. There are different things that you can do, but it outlines what those options are. So here we're saying when that is required, when that's mandatory, and when that might be optional. The other piece that's important is that this code section outlines that you have to have completed that neighborhood outreach, that neighborhood meeting, prior to your first public hearing. So you would then provide a summary, and that is included in Planning Commission's packet or in Council's packet, so that you have the information of what was discussed at that meeting. So we're just creating some boundaries around that. And that is another kind of best practice in the code world. The next portions of the chart outline when it's staff review versus Planning Commission, Board of Adjustments, and City Council. This conversation on review bodies is really important, and we really want to make sure you're comfortable with how we've outlined these prior to amendments being referred out to the public. When we review the subdivision section a little later, we'll drill down on it related to that. But besides that, it's important to note that major reviews continue to be completed by City Council, annexation, density bonus, rezonings, those types of reviews. Reviews that are by their nature more administrative are completed by staff. Those would be ensuring compliance with design guidelines, sign regulations, and home occupations. So then, as I mentioned, in addition to that chart on kind of who reviews what, there's a step-by-step process that's outlined in the code language that follows what's on your screen here. It really just compiles a lot of different sections that already exist in your code into one place so that it's easier to follow. So again, you start with your pre-application meeting, you submit your application, it's determined complete or not, you have your neighborhood meeting, public hearing, and then your review and decision. So I'll pause here to see if you've got any questions about review process or the chart, this chart.
Anyone have any questions?
I was just going to say, I like the visual, and that's like you say, I mean, the object is to make it simple for people to look at and know what they need to do. So I appreciate that.
Lori?
And maybe I missed this when you were talking, but on the major subdivision, there's a dash under city council. Can you explain that? Did I miss that? And planning commission, why is there not a decision on that?
And I'm sorry, I couldn't quite hear that.
Is your mic not on?
Hello, my mic is on.
Can't hear you.
Can't hear you.
Well, the green light is on.
Here, Lori.
Oh, you know what? I can do something on. I've got green light.
Believe it, you have a green light.
How about now?
Yes.
Better. No. That's better, thanks.
So in the chart, next to major subdivision, there's a hashtag or a hash sign under city council and planning commission. Why is there not a decision on that?
Yeah, so
Under major.
So this is something that we wanted to talk with you about when we get to the subdivision section. And it really involves, for a subdivision that is a straight subdivision, it's meeting everything in zoning. Does it maybe make sense for that to be reviewed administratively? Creating some clarity in that review process for the community. They have an opportunity to weigh in at a rezoning, at the annexation level, if there's a density bonus request, but that maybe all subdivisions should be completed at an administrative level. We can go into that conversation now if you'd like, prior to going into the other changes in subdivision, if that's helpful. But it's really kind of, I think, a key question that we want to get some feedback from you on tonight.
You said major, do you mean minor?
I mean, major, there's.
No, up there, it's got it.
Major, it's just not under minor, and it's not under final plat.
Oh, and I'm sorry, I'm looking at my thing here.
Yeah.
So under subdivision minor, staff review is
Right.
that decision.
Okay, so my packet is different than what's up there.
And that's reflective of a little bit of back and forth that we've had internally.
Okay,
So there,
I know that's why.
you are correct. There's inconsistency there, right?
So,
yeah.
so one of the discussion points tonight, which we just haven't got there yet, but when we get to the subdivision specifically, was to talk about that. All the committees and the recommendations were to make those administrative as we went through the process, but we want to talk about where council feels comfortable and what thresholds, and we have some proposals for that. We just haven't got there yet, but we can, what Jessica's saying is we can jump there now, or we can keep going in the order. But it's a great question
You can keep
because
going in order.
it's not resolved yet.
Okay.
That's for
All right.
tonight's
you.
discussion, and then
I was trying to think where you were. All right.
Well, 'cause the packet's different.
Then that one, right. All right.
Hey, Jessica, do
Yeah.
you want to maybe talk a little bit about like the concept plan review? Because that's somewhat of a change that we're proposing.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and just jump over to subdivision because I think that will help in this conversation. So here we go. Okay. So within the subdivision process, there's some updated review standards. You'll see that in both subdivision and PUD. One of the changes that we are also talking about and we've proposed is adjusting adjusting your process for majors. And then there's this conversation of who should be the review body. So right now, the language that is in front of you in your packet, minor subdivisions, those are defined as creating 10 or fewer lots. Those would be reviewed administratively. Major subdivisions continue to have potentially a 3-step process. We've said is concept plan is optional. That's something that is completed with Planning Commission and City Council. Then there's a required preliminary plan review. That is a review that is in the language that's in front of you for these subdivisions that are 11 lots or more. Those would have public hearing with P&Z and then City Council. And then that final step, the final plan or plat amendment, is done administratively. Some of the feedback that we've heard and what we wanted to touch base with you on is on this major subdivision review. Because when subdivisions are a straight subdivision, they have the services, they're meeting all of the code requirements, they're meeting all of the zoning requirements. It's really difficult for City Council to be in a position where you're hearing public feedback, but you maybe feel tied to saying yes to an application because it technically meets all of the requirements. And so there was a conversation at the Planning Commission of, are we setting a community conversation up for success or not by requiring these kind of straight subdivisions to be reviewed through the public hearing process? Or would we be better served being clear what's allowed in zoning? And if they meet zoning, it's done administratively because it is more of a checkbox and they're meeting those technical requirements.
So you're saying the only ones that would come through are if somebody wants a variance, is what we're saying, correct?
Yeah, if they are requesting a PUD, requesting a rezoning, bundling their zoning request with an annexation if they had a density bonus as well. So varying any of that underlying zone district requirements.
Well,
So the bonus density would be included in that. So I guess I'm,
an example I can think of where this would fail is when we're looking at this, granted, it's a PUD zone, but over on 17.5 Road where the code doesn't require the adjacent homes to feather, but there are a couple council members that are fighting for those homes to feather. And if it were just going to go straight zone, I mean, then we may not be able to fight so much for that, but correct. Yeah, I'm still on major. Are we not?
yeah, because that's, yeah, we're on major.
So yeah, no, oh,
No.
shit, I'm sorry, I'm jumped. Yeah.
No, she went to major. So we talked about minor, that's 10
Major.
or less. We're talking
I'm
major.
talking major.
Right.
Yeah, sorry, I'm.
Go ahead. No, go ahead, Lori. That's what we're talking about.
Well, it's just,
But that's a, like you said, a planned unit development where there's,
true. And so a PUD would automatically come to council, not just a straight zone.
right.
Right.
We're just talking ones that meet everything that's
I don't know.
already.
It seems to
there.
me like that could feel like if I were wanting to come and comment on it and I didn't have the opportunity, just as somebody that lived here, that would feel very not fair, even though probably I would still like some accountability from the people who set the rules and have my opportunity to speak about how the rules got there. I guess that's the, right?
And for future planning, I think it gives us
It
a
helps.
better
Yeah, it
handle.
absolutely gives you insight. Yeah.
Because we get insight from people that are like, why are we building so many lots in here? And I know our weekly update explains that. We get the opportunity to have that information. But I think with some of this stuff, I mean, I like the optional concept plan. I mean, that I think is a good thing. Mike, you wanted to?
I'm just ready to answer.
You're just ready.
questions yeah.
Karen or Heather, did you guys have anything you wanted to ask on this, on the major and review?
The only question I would have is, would you still do the mailing and solicit any comments from neighbors in a written form?
It just seems there's no point.
Yes, we would.
Yes, we would. And we
Okay.
receive those as staff and
Okay.
take those. We receive those even now that don't, before a public hearing. So
Right.
There's
So
a-
there would still be that option for people to have input.
just,
I guess
just
is what.
yes, definitely. There is, the only thing I want to mention is just a reminder that we had the committee that went through, like Bruce Bonar was on there and others on those committees, all recommended that we went administrative. So this is a long time in the process. I'm getting some looks as if we're bringing it up for the first time. This is,
No.
okay. Just wanted to make sure. One of the big reasonings was, and we've had a lot of discussion about this, is when we're only talking when they've met everything. And when they've met everything, we're not managing expectations really well, because we invite people to a public hearing and then you have to tell every one of those people that we can't do anything about your comment because it meets everything that is in the law already. A lot of times when you think about some of these examples, they're typically when you're going through bonus density, when you're going through planned unit development, when a project is in that meeting and they're asking for some exception that was not approved in the staff review. And because they're coming through, now they're asking for those exceptions and those changes. So as we've gone back, almost every example that has been, of more discussion, most of those, when we do minors or when there's an opportunity time means everything. So if there's an incentive of not having to go through that longer process to just meet the code that's already been approved by council, that's already been approved by the community, there's a lot of incentive to those developers to do that. When they come through the process, there's more incentive to ask for exceptions and other
So I
types
got-
of changes, which they can always still do. They can
Right.
still choose to go through that and ask for those exceptions.
So I guess my question is, we're talking about exceptions, because right now we're saying community residential, according to our master plan, is 4 to 8 units. But we're saying if they want to get bonus density to get the 8, it still has to go through this review process. Is that
Yes.
correct? Even though the master plan says 4 to 8 is allowed. That's why I want to make sure we're clear that, what goes administrative, is bonus density not part of that, even though we're saying as our master plan, it's 4 to 8 units. So a developer could come in and say, well, I want to put 8 units on here, and your master plan says that, and it's community residential, So why do I have to go and get approval? I mean,
Right,
that would
that's
be
a
my
great question.
confusion part of this whole thing.
Mhm.
So, I mean, maybe we just run through an example, of like let's just say like a 25 lot subdivision. If they were just going to do the community residential 6 lots to the acre, then, we're saying like that should not go through the public hearing process. That should just be administrative. If it's that same 25 lot subdivision and they're requesting a planned unit development that, say it's up to, 7 dwelling units an acre, but it's all attached units, like that would go through the public hearing process. Let's say that same 25 lot subdivision is not a PUD and they're just using the density bonus, where the decision-making body, the council, would determine whether or not they've met those prescriptive thresholds that are in our code to get to that 8 dwelling units an acre. That would go before the public hearing process. What we're saying is if it's just a conventional community residential, no PUD requested, no density bonus requested, is that just a regular administrative subdivision approval?
So is bonus density the only thing that would bring through?
And PUDs.
Well, oh yeah, MPODs.
Yeah.
So those would be the only two things that would trigger public hearing.
Or any request that's outside
Well,
of.
a variance,
right.
correct, any variance.
Yeah, if they were requesting a rezoning for some reason, the PUD density bonus.
Anything just sort of subdivision related, like development of the property, would require a public hearing process if it's a PUD or if it's using density bonus. We're essentially making a pitch that, if it's just a straight zone subdivision where no other things are requested, then that can be administratively approved.
Okay, so I'll throw, I mean, I'm all for, I would love that things are black and white and easy decisions can be made. However, I think we're here to listen to people who have issues, and whether we're able to do something or not, I still think it's important for us to listen. And I can look at maybe Scala as a good example. I think if that were to have been administrative and not had and who knows if anybody's going to show up from Brandon Estates, but I would certainly, I would welcome that. And I would love somebody to say, hey, you're putting a straight shot down Powis Lane, which is going to cause speeding, and why can't you put a curb in the road? What's the traffic calming? And I would love to have an audience for that, because I think that's part of our job. And so Scala is one that is going straight zone that would just have been approved without coming here. But I think it's important to have a place for people to have a voice. And I know it makes it less black and white. It makes it gray, but I guess that's where I'm coming from on that. People want to talk to somebody, and that's why we're here.
But don't the public meetings facilitate that?
Yes, but if you're talking about administrative approval, you won't have a public meeting for it.
Public hearing. It's the only time they can
That-
raise.
You won't have a public hearing.
You'll have your notice.
No, not a public hearing, but the neighborhood meetings that they're recommending.
That's enough.
So I guess a question I have on the neighborhood meetings, is that initiated by the city or is that initiated by the applicant?
The applicant.
Oh, that's what I mean. So that,
If by the applicant.
so you normally wouldn't get any of that feedback.
We go to all the neighborhood meetings though.
You go to them.
Right.
And exactly, but we typically provide the mailers, and for them to send the notice out, usually they're requesting, a city building or some sort of public building to hold that meeting. So, the reality of this, I think from the planning team's perspective, I mean, the council needs to make the decision, but like just from our perspective, when we first started talking about this, but it seemed like, okay, so originally when I first got here, it was 5 units was administrative. And then that seemed like, hey, we really need to get some of these infill projects developed, and like I think 10 would do it. And then all of a sudden we started to get, the Mulberry Street, on South Mulberry between 6th and 50 and McCune, those popped. And then we got Pinewood Estates, which is just, kind of a leftover parcel from is that Wildwood Estates is just right out, yeah, Wildwood Estates. And so, our thought was like, we need to get some of that stuff absorbed. And then we started asking the question like, gosh, is 10 just really like an artificial number? Like, how did we come up with that? And so we started talking about what are the thresholds, Is it just the bigger projects are a little bit more scary to the neighborhood surrounding them, and is that what constitutes the number? And like, how does the number get like kind of rationalized when we're trying to disseminate that to people that are planning on developing property? And that's kind of what started that conversation with the working group. And we kind of were asking ourselves like, hey, we all have all these standards and we have all this, kind of extensive zoning review that constitutes the things that they have to do, in order to build in that zone district. And those are really very black and white. Like, you can have a driveway from X number of feet from a flow line. You can have this setback. You can have, so like, it started at, like, those are how projects get developed and how they get designed and built. And, we work pretty hard to get them to a spot where we feel like they're safe and that like everybody signs off on it internally. But I understand like the due process component of that. Like, a lot of times neighbors don't really want to come and talk to a city staff member. They want to talk to the people that they elected, because they feel like they, have a more direct, connection to their elected officials. And that's valid, but it's a little bit difficult, I think, for us to be able to figure out, like, should we revisit those thresholds? Like, should they be higher? Should they be within an area, where we're trying to get projects to develop, and then areas on our edges are more, fraught with, neighbors that are like, I bought this property, I thought it was going to remain low density, and now there's a project in my backyard. Like, what are those thresholds? And so we see it fairly black and white, but we're not sitting in your seat. And so it's not like we're trying to jam something down your throat, but we're just trying to.
And I think this can create unintended consequence. I certainly appreciate where, if they meet all the requirements, people are here, they want to be heard. We're in a position where like it's all the requirements. So therefore we have to vote for it. The flip side to that is if we make this purely administrative and people feel like they have no voice at all in it, and that they have no voice in government. At least with the process it goes through now, our neighbors come to us and they're like, I'm unhappy about X, Y, and Z. We can go back and say, I appreciate what you're saying, I hear what you're saying, but here is the current process. And if you want to have this changed, here is the larger picture of how you get this changed. My concern is if we take out that comment period, people are going to feel like they're not heard at all. So now, is the PUD and the variance, is that the point of threshold for which there's public comment? Or is it even on minor use or minor subdivision, if there's people writing in and saying, I have concerns, does that go? I'm struggling with something like you are. What's that kind of magic point? But I do want to make sure people feel like they have the opportunity to get heard. And then if they disagree with it, we take those comments.
So what is the threshold for variance right now? 6, if it's over 6?
If it's over 10.
No, I'm sorry, for the major, correct. I'm talking about though for, for the bonus density. I'm sorry, I mentioned bonus density. What is that number if you're saying?
6 units per acre.
It's what, 6? Anything over 6 has to go through review, is what we're saying, is what you're proposing?
Right, because there's thresholds they have to meet and prove to this body that they've met.
So they can get 6
above
easily,
6,
is what we're saying.
Yeah,
correct.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, and I'll throw out another issue that comes up, irrigation. Of course, that comes in more concentrated areas than others. So if you add 25 more homes to this line, we're not going to have water, and you need to have an adequate irrigation system. Like, that's something we wouldn't hear. Now we probably know that irrigation's, and it's just going to get worse. I mean, I full on recognize that, but right now, I mean, that is always one of the bigger beefs that we hear, but people need to be able to say that. Like, right? I mean, you just have to, so I guess in having this minor being 10, how long's that been going on now? A few years, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't had any issues or feedback either way, just like for you, I guess you're the new one, and Heather, I don't think you've gotten any feedback from 10 subdivision or 10 units or less, but I don't know, I think, and I appreciate where this conversation went and why it went there, but I also think if you're sitting here, that's part of your job is you have to listen. People need to be heard. People want to be heard. And that's, I think, part of this job. And again, whether we can do anything about it, it's also an education piece. Like, yeah, we hear what you're saying. This is why we have to approve it. Here's the bigger picture of how you can change it in the future. And I think that contact is very important, and not just in this, not even if it's a PUD or, you know, an extra density bonus kind of thing. I think just once you hit a certain number of lots, people get a little twitchy about what's going in next to them. So
So for clarification, when we went from 6 to 10, did we see the development being proposed changed because they felt it was just a more streamlined process?
So I think that's kind of a two-part question. Like, do we see there be more predictability with the, you know, kind of challenged infill projects? Absolutely. But like, did we see the developments change because of something that would have been influenced at council? I haven't seen that, you know, as far as, but I have seen it on other projects though, where fencing disputes, irrigation, you know, questions get answered, but not on the small ones, just because it is, they're already really challenging, you know, to try and get a project developed that is, you know, kind of interior to our city boundaries already.
Okay.
I would say these comments are very, very well taken. I think we'd love to try and get some feedback as to, 10 is an arbitrary number. We went from 6 to 10 and just picked it. Like, there was nothing tied to it. So we haven't had any issues there. We see, like, as Dan mentioned, from a professional review standpoint, we don't see any difference until you're hitting a PUD, until you're hitting, you know, we've covered those. But obviously you feel a difference at a certain level, but we would love to see the 10 go higher, because we don't see, if it's 20 or 10, it's no different in the review for us, or what's going to happen in a meeting, and we hear from the public. But so we'd love to explore where that threshold. I also want to just make the point, we're not doing anything innovative here by any means. We're one of the few remaining to go through those processes. So I mean, we get a lot of pressure from, you know, on that front as well. So
So the pressure is what, from developers saying they want a speedier process, or what?
well, it's a speedier. It costs them a lot more money going through the months of meetings, where they know if they're meeting, there's not going to be a different outcome. And even if some people wanted change, you can't change it during that. You'd have to change it in a whole separate process unrelated to that project. However, you make good points of that's where you can hear some things to think about changes, but that change is going to be in a whole different process of looking at the code like we're looking now, not looking at the code change. You can't make code changes during an application process. Right?
Yes, but what you can do is explain to people why it is this way. And although they may not be happy, at least there's an understanding.
Right. And I just want you to know that they are not shy to contact us when they get a notice to their home with our contact. We get more comments sent in often, except for those unique circumstances that I would say are all tied to a PUD or tied to a bonus density or something like that. But we get plenty of comments. We respond to everybody. We can go through the technical reasoning. So I politely disagree that people don't have a voice. They have a voice through the processes we're doing now. And
I think that we're not saying they don't have a voice. We're saying we don't hear that.
Right.
And I think what I'm hearing more is that we don't hear those comments to see about future, you know, when you start talking about changes we have to make, or policy decisions we have to make. We don't.
Would it make a difference if on every development, no matter how large, we get copies of all those comments? I'm still saying it can be, I'm just trying to think of if it's still administrative.
I think the reason why you're not hearing a lot of those is because people aren't surprised about development that meets the standards. It's the exceptional pieces that
Right. I mean, 10 units is 2.25 acres, right?
Say that one more time.
I mean, 10 units is what, 2.25 acres?
Yeah, I mean.
roughly depending on how
roughly,
they do it, yeah.
About 2 acres per 10. Yeah.
But if you think
We're-
about
we're
straight
concerned ab-
zones that come through, sorry, yeah, go ahead.
Well, about a timeline, if that's all this is to save time and the predictability, why can't we put those subdivisions on a different track so that they still come here? But if they're going to meet everything, why can't we put them on a fast track through council so that there is a public hearing? Because I love that you guys are available and I'm sure you do get an earful, but it's not the same yelling at you as it is yelling at us. And I don't want to take that away from people. I mean, and I'm the one getting yelled at, and I recognize that, but I think that's important. That's part of the job. So is there a way to fast track the people that are meeting the code and giving a public opportunity?
I think, Jessica, that'd be a great question for you. I mean, you've worked with a lot of communities. If there's some kind of hearing some of the thoughts and feedback, are there some thoughts that you could share of, quasi processes or other reasonings on either end here?
Yeah, and so I've seen communities deal with this in whether it's subdivision or another review process, kind of deal with it in a couple of different ways. One is if you have things going through an administrative process, there's an option for the administrative review body, so the community development director, to refer that to the planning commission and city council. And you could either create that as community development director discretion, or there's some kind of thresholds that are met there. The other one that I've seen, maybe with mixed success, but might actually work for you all, is what's called a call-up option, where the community development director would approve something, and then there is a required notice that goes to city council. It would be something that's included on one of your regular meeting agendas, and it's just a notification that we have approved this subdivision. It met all of the requirements, and so it's been approved. That's an opportunity for any neighbors to come and make any comments about that. And you could then choose, if you wanted to call that up and kind of review that decision. That might be a way to kind of balance what I'm hearing. I think the other piece is, do you want to have a neighborhood meeting that's required for any of these subdivisions that are done administratively? There's a specific record that's created, and then staff can use that in their review as they craft any conditions for a subdivision.
So Jessica, you're saying that one, or they call it up to council, it would bypass planning then, correct? There really would be no reason to go to planning, it just goes straight to council?
Typically, unless you felt that as part of that call up, you wanted to get the planning commission's feedback for some reason, so you could build that into the code language as well.
Well, how much, I mean, that would save, how many, I mean, that'd save a month, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I like that idea. I just want some accountability.
Right.
I agree with you, Lori, on that one. I like that concept.
So I think then we would have to work on what is that threshold? Is it just a singular comment? So, that becomes a little bit difficult for us to somewhat adjudicate what is a call up. Is it actually an application that like a citizen fills out that says, hey, I'd like council to take this up? Because, just being quite frank, we get comments from the public where, we're 5-10 minutes at the counter and then the problem goes away. But like it still would somewhat constitute a public comment, that would, if you're sort of really strictly interpreting that, would be, hey, this needs to be taken up by council. So we would really need to think about what those thresholds are, as far as like what constitutes them saying, hey, listen, this needs to go directly to council for a decision, where neighbors would be notified of a public hearing.
Kyle?
Well, I'd hate to keep adding layers to the process here, but maybe there could be a sort of process with you guys at the counter, whoever's talking to them face to face, that, the first step is we have this interaction, see if we can explain maybe the legalities of the situation or the technical aspects. And if it seems like their grievance is outside of that scope in some way, it's irrigation or it's this or that, then they could do the call up. I don't know if there could be kind of like a step-by-step
Yeah, I don't want to be, like, I guess from our department standpoint, you know, council, correct me if I'm wrong. I don't want to be trying to convince somebody to not do that.
Yeah.
You know, I want to set everybody up where all of the due process is afforded to them without us trying to, you know, and we would not, but like having the perception that we're browbeating
Right.
somebody, that it's going to be approved anyways. And, you know, I want to make sure that that request can land as soft as possible, just so, you know, so it happens, you know, so it's a valid process.
Yeah, I think, you know, when I think about that, I think about there's going to be numerous, well, we see a lot of those where it might not be necessarily somebody coming complaining or that. They're just, I heard about this, and then they have some clarifications, and it's a simple conversation. They feel good, they leave, versus all the other layers that could be like, well, I don't like that, or I'm concerned about this or that. So I think we would have to really dig into what triggers it, so it's not so subjective or create a false perception, right? So,
You know,
the way that I've seen this work well is, in some ways, the call up happens on everything, right? So it's everything is a notification, and it is council's option. Do you want to call it up and have a conversation about it? And you can make that judgment based off of the record that's established. So that would be, you're getting all of the comments that staff has received, you're getting all of that information,
okay.
and you can make that decision. So there's not like, so it is very equal treatment, I would say, in that option.
So we'd have to make that decision at a workshop. We'd have all that information, and at a workshop, we'd say, okay, we've decided there's enough information here to do a call up, or we look at it and say, it's probably fine, and we're okay with it going forward.
Yeah, so like the call up can happen, you know, at the administrative level, and it can also happen, I think, at the council level, where you decide, hey, listen, there's enough meat on this application. Let's set the hearing date and let's talk about it. And it can still meet that, you know, that threshold.
How many days do we have to have for hearing? 18?
So you know, this would be post all of the notifications that would go out to review agencies.
Right.
This would just be, you know, requiring that 15-day notice.
Oh, 15 days, okay.
So,
Lori, are we setting, once again, frustration levels for people? Or great, it's a call out. Council's agreed to, yes, they want to hear what we have to say. But the reality is it's going to go through anyways because all the criteria has been met.
Probably, but we can also put stipulations on that, like, okay, we're going to approve this application. However, we need to make sure that you have a vault that will, you know, accommodate 60 houses. We want to see the engineering, or you put perimeter fencing that matches the existing neighborhood, like stuff like that. We can add stuff to it.
On a PUD, right.
Hey, I'm sorry, Lori, I couldn't hear you. Could you put your mic closer and say that again?
It was brilliant, Lori, say it again.
No, I was just saying, in that situation, we can also put stipulations on approval. So yes, it might be something that is just going to go through anyway, but we can say, well, you need to have an irrigation system, like a vault that makes that does blah, 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 or match the fence with the adjacent neighborhood because of X, Y, Z. And so we can add more to whatever is being asked. Does that make sense?
We can do that.
I said it better the first time.
Right, we can do that on a PUD.
You can do that we can do that on any subdivision. You can add stipulations.
I mean,
Mike, can I make a comment?
Yes.
I was just gonna say, I think the few times that we've been involved in things like that, I felt like council was like redoing and I really felt like there were certain things that trusting the staff, the administration, that they have gone through those things. And so, I mean, yeah, I'm just where we're, you know, stumbling over each other, I guess. I don't really know, but does that make sense?
Yeah, but this is Lori. I'm going to add to that. We have Dan right now. We're not always going to have Dan. Maybe we will. I don't know. But you have to also think this is for future staff of who might not be in this room right now too.
Which could be, I mean, you can change these
Mike?
too, I would. Is it not on?
Yeah, I can hear it now.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, so obviously, like any of these changes can be changed by this group at any point in time, right? So, I mean, you got to go through the process to change them, but
Like, I think that, you know, we've heard quite a bit about this. It sounds like we need to maybe get some options in front of you, potentially just on this, or maybe any other elements that are associated with the presentation tonight. One thing that, you know, kind of one last parting thought is, you know, when we think about setting up, you know, kind of processes for council to consider for applications, a lot of times we back into that with when are the entitlements obtained? And, you know, with the planned unit development, they're obtained when council approves that zoning ordinance. And, you know, with density bonus, they're approved when council approves the density bonus for a subdivision. And from our perspective, when we set base level densities in residential zone districts, we're essentially setting the entitlements. And so, you know, I would really caution us to setting up call-up procedures or you know, other public hearing processes that are still including some of those things that we've already set rules for, like densities and setbacks and bulk standards, building height, things like that. If it is really truly, you know, irrigation, you know, perimeter fencing, you know, if it's, you know, elements like that, I think that's valid. Like, I would consider those to be like kind of neighborly questions, because especially with like irrigation related things, like there's a lot of, you know, sort of upstream issues with that. But, you know, one of the things that Jessica and I have talked about is that if the subdivision, like actual development and engineering is like at the point when council hears it, like they've already spent the money. And what we've heard from our development community is that it feels really speculative to go into a community, spend that money, design to their zone districts and their densities and bulk standards, and still feel like it's a bit up for grabs. So at a bare minimum, I would really encourage us to, you know, frame those call-up, you know, discussions, or frame that, you know, where those things really have already been established, and it is maybe some fringe elements that are needing to be talked about, because otherwise I worry that some of the small-time developers and builders, you know, that are throwing it all on the line for a, you know, an 11-lot subdivision, you know, that we would maybe not get those things done. And you know, we have a lot of purpose statements in our comp plan that really say that we need to incentivize those. And so I think we've heard a lot tonight. We'll try to come back with some, you know, some you know, procedural examples from other communities and put them in front of you, and maybe not just sort of think on the fly of what the process can be, but, you know, have everybody be able to mull it over, and then we can, you know, have a kind of a thoughtful discussion about how we want these to be presented before council.
Okay, I got one more thing to add to that then, because I think one of the discussions was how big should a minor subdivision be? I think that's the other question, is 10 the right number? I mean, and maybe that's just kind of reviewing what we've developed in the last 10 years, how many 3-acre parcels that were just outside of that, you know, because I think that's what question you guys are asking too. You're saying 10's an arbitrary number. So what is a fair number or accurate number?
So, like, I guess from our perspective, just being quite blunt, you know, like the Harrison townhomes was a really challenging public hearing. You know, some of you might remember that. And that's a 6, you know, plex townhome project. and Iron Wheel was a really challenging project, and that was a 273 lot subdivision. And so I think from our perspective, it's like, some of the small ones can be really tough and some of the big ones can be really tough. And it's difficult to, put our finger in the air and say, this is one that really needs, the full suite of due process, before council for a decision to be made. But some things to leave you with, 25 units constitutes a secondary access. That is a threshold, to consider and keep in the back of your pocket. There are some design related things that specific to our engineering specs that as projects get bigger, they have to put more infrastructure in. So we can certainly bring Sam into that conversation so he can give you his perspective on, when projects grow in scale, these are some different things that go into our review process. But for us, like the density is the density. And the bulk standards are the same for a 4-lot subdivision and community residential as they are for a 500-lot subdivision. So maybe he would be a good person to bring into the conversation.
Would it be helpful to, I mean, listening to this tonight, it makes me think, and the way Dan mentioned it earlier, where we have, there's some very, there's certain standards that are, okay, here's the distance, here's the height, here's, very kind of concrete requirements that that aren't the neighborhood issue type things as much. I don't know how you said that earlier, but similar in a smaller scale to you're allowed, the code from a property rights standpoint. I own this property. I know that the city law allows me to do X, Y, and Z. I can put a shed here. I don't have to go through public hearings and all that. I go to the counter, I get my permit and do it. So there's components of any subdivision that are more like that, no matter what the size are. But then there's components like have been mentioned, irrigation. It could be the access. It could be the traffic flow, some of those things. So if we explore this call up, maybe it's less about number and it's more about what are the typical trigger points that get more subjective in applying versus versus it seems very silly if the law, if you buy a piece of property and the law tells you that you can do, you can go to this height, you can go to this size, you can go to this setback. That's what we're trying to address, is not having something that's very clear and defined, but then it becomes subjective just because you have to go through a process. However, there's those pieces that, so I think we have some work to do to kind of look at that and maybe bring some examples of.
But I like the direction.
Here's the frame of the
where
call
that's
up.
going, which is because that way it doesn't set us up for,
Right.
well, the law says this, you don't like it, but it's the law, we have to vote for it, versus stuff where council has influence over. And if you can sprinkle on that, it's early enough in the process, so it's not a huge burden for the developers, would be awesome.
Great.
The expedited process, in my opinion, is a win-win for the neighbors because they get noticed and then they have 3 months maybe, so if we can.
2 different hearings.
Yeah. And so we have to do a lot of education on the front end of that of no, it's this meeting, you need to be at this one. And so if there are some more expedited ways of accomplishing that, I think that they would be happy. I think the development community would be happy. And certainly I think the council would be happy.
All right, so Jessica, you got more in this, or is this the?
That was easy. What's next?
Yeah.
We got a few more sections.
Okay.
So let's see, this next section is related to modifications. So we are proposing creating a new chapter that combines variances, those hardship variances that BOA hears, with some allowances for administrative modifications. So again, it means there's one place for applicants to go to understand modifications to dimensional standards and where those are permitted. That hardship variance section is really consistent with current code. Review remains with BOA, consistent with state statute requirements, and the applicant has to demonstrate the hardship. So the new addition is this administrative modification. which is a code best practice. It's used throughout the country, but particularly on the Western Slope. We've reviewed a few codes that have this in here, and it just allows you to address something that pops up during a building permit review, during construction, that is maybe a minor modification. So it allows these small scale adjustments. The way we've written this is that those would be allowed to address either building code requirements or energy efficiency improvements. This is limited to projects that are in that kind of construction pipeline. It's not something going through a land use review, because we don't want this to be used as a way to vary code requirements. It's really about addressing something that's coming up in the permitting and construction process. So that's new. These are relatively low thresholds, but consistent with other communities on the Western Slope.
Jessica, is that number right? It says lot area minimum 15%, lot coverage maximum 15%.
Yeah, so in zone districts, there might be a minimum lot coverage requirement as well as a maximum lot coverage requirement. And so we want to make sure that you could vary both of those.
So these numbers are going to change based on
the zone
zoning?
district. Yep.
Okay.
And again, they're really relatively small.
Little bit of context here, we have the variance process to deviate from the bulk standards in our code, setbacks, building heights, et cetera. You really have to be somewhat aggrieved or harmed in a previous land use process to constitute an actual variance before the BOA. There are a lot of examples of, hey, I want to build a detached garage and I've got, an F750. And I really need it to be a 17-foot high pitch or ridge. And,
Or motorhome.
or a motorhome, yeah. If they even make 750s. But, or like I want to build a shed, but I don't really have enough of a side setback to meet that. So it's really just sort of helping people out that, that are in really like a jam that maybe was not thought about, when they built the house, and, just using our best judgment, and how properties develop, 5% here, 2% there can really get those across the finish line, where the Board of Adjustment would have to essentially say, you bought the house, it's not my problem, or probably a better example would be in some of our mobile home parks where they're not actually set where the planning clearance is said. And they're trying to do some sort of, canopy awning, over a back porch, things like that, where, really the buyer had absolutely no idea what those rigid standards were. So, being able to give them a little bit of help in that process goes a long way, from my opinion.
Great. Any other questions here before I move on? Okay.
Nope.
Wow, wait, so if I read this correctly, for building height, let's say if I want to build a subdivision and the building height says 32 feet, but in order to get that extra housing density, that extra 10%, 3 feet would make all the difference. Does that then fall underneath this?
No, and anything on the density goes through the bonus density conversation. It doesn't go through those.
All right, thanks.
All right, Jessica.
Okay,
you're up.
great. All right, so PUD, these changes again revolve around review authority and some updated standards. We kind of alluded to this, but we've coordinated the language and the steps that are proposed within PUD and subdivision. So you'll see the word sketch plan is now out of the code, and it's replaced in both subdivision and PUD with concept plan. So that is completed in a work session with P&Z and council. And that first step really focuses on meeting the requirements of the comprehensive plan and other planning documents that the city's adopted. The second step is the review of preliminary plan. which requires a public hearing with planning and zoning, and then to city council for approval. Importantly, proposed zoning changes would happen concurrently with this. The idea is that you're reviewing any changes to underlying zoning and the PUD at the same time, and that's then creating that entitlement. And that allows that final plan, which is again kind of more of a checklist, that is reviewed administratively, because the bulk of the conversation about where buildings should be located, what their dimensions should be, that's all happening at that preliminary plan stage. And so, as I said, final plan would be administrative. And again, that is a very common best practice in land use codes, because it is, that final plat is truly a checklist. You've dealt with all the main conversations in preliminary. So pause there and see if you have any questions.
Any questions? Nope.
Okay. All right, we've gone through subdivision, and thank you for that conversation. We'll return with some additional ideas. All right, annexation is next. This chapter has been updated to clarify the role of Planning Commission as a recommending body to City Council, and really just to ensure that state law is adequately met. Most of the changes that you'll see are really about reformatting and are not really substantive. The review criteria focus on meeting policies of the comprehensive plan, having adequate infrastructure service, and being within an area that's been identified for annexation within the comprehensive plan. Any comments or questions on annexation?
Any questions? All right, hearing none, you're up again, Jessica.
Great. We're almost done. Historic preservation. This chapter is just mostly reorganized. It's generally consistent with the current language. We've made a few additions though. We've added some additional purpose statements, kind of addressing some general best practices that include language about balancing the preservation of historic character with property rights, with private property rights. That was something that we thought was important to just clarify here. And we've also added some additional definitions to create some clarity about terms that are specific to historic preservation. So those now live in this chapter. These are all really typical definitions in most Colorado communities and reflect the Secretary of Interior standards. Nothing has changed though about the review or authorities. So with that, any comments or questions?
Do you have any questions on this section? All right, hearing none.
Great. All right, this is the last code section to review. We have made some minor changes to definitions. We've consolidated and deleted terms that maybe mean the same thing. So for instance, nursery and greenhouse. Nursery right now says see greenhouse. So we've consolidated definitions where we can. We've also made some updates to definitions around affordable housing, updated the duplex definition to allow a side-by-side or an over-under configuration in a duplex, and then made some just general clarity on some of the floor area measurement cleanups. So this is kind of high level of changes in definitions, but any questions or comments on what you've seen in those red lines?
Will we have an opportunity to see, like, for example, the affordable housing unit definition at some point, and to have like a discussion about it, I guess?
Yeah, let me.
Because I know that's something that keeps coming up. And
yeah, so here it is.
cool.
It's in the packet as well.
Yeah, I just
so tonight we could get feedback. Again, these will still go through the normal hearing processes, so it doesn't all have to be tonight. But if you have any thoughts now, we can. It's good for us if the group wants us to start making modifications before we send it out for review. So yes is the short answer.
I just didn't know if this was the time to like dig in deep on something like this, or if this is, I mean, I know we're going to have lengthy conversations about this in the future, probably.
I think it'd be good if you have, if there's some pieces you want us to look into, it just gives us a head start in bringing some thoughts. And if that creates more discussion, that's great tonight. But again, it doesn't have to be the end all discussion, right?
I think that like this specifically, we would hate to have this before P and Z first reading, second reading before council and have the council feel like, well, that's a start. Like, I think we, like, if we're gonna define it, we need to make sure that everybody is comfortable with that. I know we're gonna have a discussion at a workshop about next steps and policies, but any feedback now, I think, will help us tremendously in being prepared for that workshop discussion. But as this, turns into an application, it can evolve too.
I guess I'm not sure how prepared I am to like dig in on the definition, but I know that a lot of times there's like specific percentages that are talked about as part of, this is 30%, anything over 35 or 40 and so I just wondered, this seems like a really good start.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it's very clear as to what, I know it talks about median incomes and to establish income limits, but
So if they're low income tax credit projects, Jaffa likes to see those come under 60% AMI. So, but it is a range depending on their financing mechanisms, whether it's a 4% or a 9%. So I don't know what Jessica's thoughts are on that, but we could codify, basically standards that are in place for low income tax product.
and I'm not even saying that I necessarily know, I'm wondering if this is too broad, just doesn't really focus things in.
One of my updates later is that, at the next two workshops, this month's workshop, we have plans to talk about this subject and talk about just general policies related to it, which to talk about general policies, we gotta make sure what it is defined. So maybe we dive into that a bit as we talk about policies and get feedback. The other part of that workshop is to get feedback from you all on preparing for the August workshop, where we'll have guest speakers from Chaffa and DOLA and possibly the Grand Junction Housing Authority, and where we have a chance to ask questions, but to get feedback from you in July that we can send to them to kind of help prepare for that meeting, so it's not just starting at the moment. And then the third piece of the July workshop is to just give you some updates on discussions we're having with the Grand Junction Housing Authority, and how Fruita would works with them when these projects are applying right now to the state, since they're the only authority in the valley. And so we kind of have that threefold. So maybe we just keep in mind that we can dive deeper into the definition, talk about policies, and then just some updates of discussions we're having in prep for the next workshop. I don't think that that wouldn't hurt our time frame.
I don't think that would hurt our timeline at all. I just, there's lots of different pots of money that fund these. And so it would be terrible, I think, for us to paint ourselves into a corner of one type of application. So, but I think that referencing is key, and maybe not codifying that stuff in the code, but they need to be really detailed in policies that council sets for how they're going to look at these projects. But I look at this definition as a test. It has to meet that test. And then, those policies need to determine
Then you dive
what are
deeper.
we going to put on the table, in order to get those projects to happen.
The other thing, I know we talked about affordable housing, but I like the word, and I know Mike and I heard that at the State of the Valley, is attainable, I think, because there's, what is affordable? We can go by all the different percentages and all that. That doesn't mean that fruit is still affordable.
I think there is a difference.
Is there a difference between
I think
affordable and
so.
obtainable?
Yeah, there's definitely, there are some standard definitions for each of those. And then there's other pieces like income restricted housing. I mean, you can get through it. Councilman Harvey went through one of the publications that CML put out on this, and that's available for all of us. And it kind of does a rundown of the definitions of each of those. So we could make sure to include that. And as we go into those discussions as well, that could be a good reference.
Anything else on affordable housing right now?
No.
No, all right, well, that's all right. What else was there? Was there anything else in there, Jessica or Dan? Or anybody else have any questions?
Only other thing I was going to cover is next steps and kind of moving into the public comment period and then providing final language. So we've provided red lines, and that I think those red lines are what will go out as part of that public comment period, so folks can see and understand what is proposed versus what is staying the same. And then as we move forward, we'll be doing some deep dive work here at Design Workshop to create one brand new shiny draft of the land use code that compiles all of these changes into one location. So those are some of our next steps as we move to adoption.
All right, any other questions for Jessica or Dan or staff? All right, I'm not hearing any. Well, thank you, Jessica. This helps move us in the right direction.
Great, thank you, appreciate it.
Anything else, Dan? Or because we don't need to make a motion or anything on this item, it's just a report. All right. With that, we're going to move into our city manager's report.
Right. Thank you, Mayor, members of council. I already covered the upcoming workshops. Microphones for this room.
I thought they were here already.
They were supposed to be scheduled to be installed. The day they were coming, we had a failure with the system that essentially is in the outdoor pool where they communicate with patrons, and so they are booked out pretty well. The group we work with, who's finishing the project. So essentially, we had to make the call to send them there to get that fixed and reschedule these. So there is a goal to have those done, or the plan is to have all the new mics installed before the next council meeting.
So Mike, can I tag something on there? Because I know you're saying, so our council meeting, what do we have on our agenda for July? Because I've got something I want to bring out to council and ask about adding on, but I don't know how much stuff we have on our
For
agenda.
the workshop?
Yeah, for the workshop.
For the workshop, we have, really it's the affordable, attainable, and housing discussion related to general policies. So not particular projects, but what thresholds we are interested in as a city.
What kind of time? I'm just asking how much time do you think that'll take?
I would say, that's going to be between all the topics related to that. It's going to be over an hour. I mean, it's going to be a good hour and a half, I would say, on that.
I mean, I don't know how long this will take, but I want to have some type of policy discussion on like community support, because we've had a lot of feedback lately, and what do we do moving forward? Right, what gets in the city link? What does our communication policy look like? And I know this last one that came up with the Fruita for Equality, it was like the bulk of council is on board with, yes, let's support it, but what is supporting?
Sure.
What does it involve? Or what are our criteria? Because we did the same thing with proclamations and presentations. What is the criteria that we make that say, okay, this is, our policy? So I'd like to add that discussion on, because I think sooner than later is better than.
Yeah, we could do it on the next meeting 2 weeks from now in administrative, or we could put it on, I think we could fit, if those are the only two things we could.
Well, I'd like to put it on.
Oh.
I think I'm having
we had the budget
saying, yes, sooner is better than later.
Got a lot of feedback.
We do have the budget calendar overview at the workshop too, but that's usually pretty quick. It's just saying here's the schedule,
right.
And but
that can be here for the record. Here's the schedule if anybody has a problem.
Yeah.
Okay.
Would you like to discuss it? Do you prefer the next regular meeting or the workshop?
I prefer the workshop.
I don't care.
I don't care.
Because I don't believe the next meeting is not.
It's short.
The next meeting, I don't believe it.
You're gonna have to have a formal head nod or a count as to where we're gonna go with it.
Right.
So
So have it at a meeting, because then we'll have a formal.
I think that'd be great. And obviously, if that turns into, we need to look into more, then we could add it to a workshop moving forward. But it's not
So I guess put that under administrative agenda,
Yeah.
right? Or is it, well, it'll be under council reports and
council
actions.
reports and actions.
Yeah. So then let's do that at the next, 2 weeks from tonight then.
Yeah, we really don't. It's a lighter agenda. My informal review is that night, but there's not, I don't think we have any public hearings for,
Special event liquor.
Oh,
yeah.
well, but again, I think you're gonna have to have a formal head count on this one. but-
Right. So is everybody good with putting it on there for the 2 weeks from tonight? And head yeses. Karen, Heather?
Yep. Yes.
All right. So let's put that under council reports and actions in 2 weeks. All right, back to your report, Mike.
All right. We did welcome a new employee today who started, Jesse Hess. He's our new code compliance and neighborhood services coordinator. So today was his first day. The planning and development department's thrilled to have him. He began his career as a police officer, and then as a police officer transitioned into code compliance and enforcement with Grand Junction, and then later was a code compliance officer, strictly a code compliance in Lincoln County, and is now here with us, and just moved to Fruita and bought a home in Fruita, and we're excited to have Jesse start. And the last update I have is it's definitely bittersweet, but Turi Nykum will be leaving us. He's heading to Durango to be their new Parks and Recreation Director. That was just announced tonight, right before our meeting started in Durango. And so he's definitely excited for the opportunities. He's going to be a great fit there, and they're lucky to have him. He's done some incredible things here in his close to 15 years. He would have been 15, this fall. So just wanted to let you all know. I think he'll be letting staff know tomorrow. So
don't be tweeting it tonight.
no, that'd be great not to. But he'll be we don't have an exact last day, but it'll be early, like August 6th or somewhere around there will be his last day here, and then he'll be heading there. So yeah, that's it. That's all I have tonight.
Has there been a posting for a communications person, or is that in next year's budget?
Yeah, we don't have that budgeted at all yet. Yeah.
I was just thinking that'd be a great person to have up to a workshop, but.
Yeah. All right. With that, we're going to move into our council reports and actions. I'm going to go ahead and we'll start around the room. Lori.
GBT met on Monday, and they're going after a grant that's very likely that they'll get it. Actually, the state of Colorado is applying for it for a mobility hub. And that mobility hub will hopefully tie in everything, the train, the buses, the local buses, and hopefully even trails and bikes and all that stuff. But where that is going to go is still undetermined. What the plan looks like is still undetermined. And they jumped the planning grant to go for the construction grant because they're combining it with some things that might be happening along I-70B on the way out of. Anyway, it's a big thing. And so it's kind of exciting. It's a $10 million grant. And I think in the next couple of months, we're really going to be hitting it hard to see what that building should look like and where it's going to go. And more importantly, who's responsible for it, because that's still up in the air too. Who's going to own it? Who's going to be responsible? So that's it.
Okay. Next, Karen.
Nothing from me. Thanks.
All right. Kyle.
Meetings are forthcoming.
Okay. Heather.
I only had planning commission, and you just heard everything that I heard.
All right. Perfect. Matthew.
GJEP is not meeting this month. That meeting got canceled. The next meeting will be their annual retreat. However, I'm also on the Colorado Women's Alliance Board, and on the 17th of this month, they're doing a free workshop for any female that is interested in getting involved in public office. So it's open to anybody and everyone.
That's it?
That's it.
All right. I only have one thing, and I didn't believe she didn't mention that, but Lori was in the paper this week. Are you the new chair? Are you the new chair for CMU? CMU?
I'm the treasurer.
You're the
I'm
treasurer.
executive.
You're on the executive committee. All right, I didn't know. In the paper, it made it sound like you're chairing that. Yes, it was in the paper, so I thought you'd be announcing that. So, all right. You know, you're just accepting more responsibility. All right, so I made it sound like you were going to be the chair of that, the way the paper. Yeah. So, oh, hey, congratulations. All right. So that's all I have with that. Since that's the end of our thing, we are going to adjourn at 8:55 p.m.